Welcome, dear listeners, to the fifth podcast of the Cubic Wisdom Project. My name is Nüket Kardam. In a series of podcasts, we're exploring my poetry offered in the album Journey to the Real by Cubic Wisdom. My partner in this project is Amir Etemadzadeh, who composed the music to each of the poems offered in our album Journey to the Real, which you can listen to on Spotify, iTunes, or Amazon. And you can also watch them as videos on YouTube by going to youtube.com/@cubicwisdom, one word. In fact, you can listen to the podcasts on YouTube as well. They are available on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and on YouTube. If you'd like to know more about our project, please go to cubicwisdomproject, one word, .com. So, my name is Nüket, and I have been a student of Sufism, the mystical tradition of Islam, for some years, and my poetry is inspired by my practice, learning from the Sufi teachers I've studied with over the years, and ultimately from Muhyiddin Ibn Arabi and Mevlana Celaleddin Rumi, the most precious two guides of the tradition. This episode is called The Empty Fullness of Silences. I have invited Amir Etemadzadeh, who is a talented musician and composer, to discuss silences, especially the place of pauses in music, as well as the value and meaning of silences in more general terms. So let's first listen to the poem accompanied to Amir's composition, and then I will invite him for a conversation. Also, for your information, I recite this poem in both English and Turkish. Here it goes. Silences. There are different kinds of silences. There's silence that comes from a deep well where the words are ripples on the surface, where silence is the ocean and the fish are words. Sessizliğin değişik türleri var. Bir sessizlik var ki derin bir kuyu gibi, sözler yüzeydeki köpükler. Bir sessizlik var ki deniz gibi, sözler içinde yüzen balıklar. And then there is the silence of oppression, the silence after a fight. The silenced majorities when to speak is power and silence is powerlessness. Bir de sessizlik var, zulmün sessizliği, kavgadan sonraki sessizlik. Çoğunluğun suskunluğu, konuşmanın güç olduğu, suskunluğun bastırılmadan geldiği. No, that's not the kind of silence I want. Instead, let's have the shared silence of beauty, of power, where the hearts are quiet. Hayır, benim istediğim sessizlik bu değil. İstediğim paylaşılan sessizlik. Onun güzelliği, gücü, kalplerin sessizliği. Where we know when to speak and when not to, where listening comes first, listening to the running stream, to the children, to the cries for help, to the passing clouds, to the music of the spheres, where silence is the key to the notes we hear. Ne zaman konuşup ne zaman susacağını bilmek, önce dinlemek, gürül gürül akan nehri dinlemek, çocukların oyunlarını, yardım isteyenlerin feryatlarını, gelip geçen bulutları, gezegenlerin müziklerini dinlemek ve duyduğumuz notaların sessizlikten bize ulaştığını bilmek. So, welcome, Amir, to our second podcast together. I'm so excited to have you here again on this podcast. Welcome.
Thank you so much for having me, Noket. It's a pleasure to be back.
Well, there were some things that we sort of left off for another podcast, and that's where I'd like to start. So, I actually named this podcast The Emptifulness of Pauses.
Oh,
So,
emptiness.
going from silences, the poem Silences,
Hmm.
I'd love for us to discuss the emptifulness of pauses. That's
Okay.
the title. What do you think?
That's a beautiful title you have chosen, and that's a very meaningful word that you're using. Yeah, definitely.
Let's go for it. So I have the way we stopped last time was we talked in that previous podcast about
Hmm.
how it is said that the best musicians are those who use the silences or the pauses the best.
Yes.
Do you agree with that, or would you like to expand on that perhaps?
I definitely do. So, especially in more thinkful or more thought-provoking type of music, if silences are not used wisely, it would be difficult to make the audience or the listener to really like get deep into their thoughts. I believe that silences or rests in music are as important as the notes themselves. And
Hmm.
just like breathing, we breathe in and out, there is a little gap in between inhaling and exhaling, or there's a little gap between our heartbeats. Our system is set to be able to give itself a moment of rest and then go to the next thing basically. So I think our brains work the same. When we're listening to a phrase of music, and there's no
Hmm.
gap between the first phrase and the second phrase and the third phrase and the fourth phrase, it's hard for the audience to follow basically. If you want to make him think, if you want to just keep him on their toes and like create a soundtrack for like escape movie for example, that's a very good way of doing it. But if you want to get the audience to like go deep and start thinking about something, then the rest or the silence in between phrases is very important. In Persian music, the older the player gets, the more silence they use in their music. So
Huh.
one of the factors that we look at in order to see how how good a musician is or how what is the word seasoned a musician is by looking at how much rest and how much pause they put between their phrases or how much they're rushing through the phrases. So I think,
Oh.
yeah, so that's what
Mm-hmm.
I think that it is definitely important.
That's actually fascinating because what I'm hearing you say is that silence is just as important as the notes themselves,
Yes.
basically. Just as important, if not more.
Yeah, just as important and in some cases even more, because you want to create
Mm.
that moment of weight. You know, like notes
Yeah.
cannot create that, but the silence can. Imagine like
Hmm.
the audience, like you're in a big room and you're performing for like 300 people, and you just start your music while people are just clapping or talking. That doesn't really make sense. Usually people wait for a silence to form itself within the room and then they start the
Mm.
music because we want that freshness. Every time there's a moment of silence, the ear, the brain, the thoughts, everything gets clear and they're waiting for something else to come. So we have this observability to actually get more information from what is coming. So I believe that sometimes as a musician you need to be able to purposely put silences that are even longer than you think they should be. At the beginning of a
Mm.
piece, in between um, parts, in between phrases, and sometimes at the end of your music, the way that you finish a piece of music, uh, you you just pause and you wait until you basically go to the next piece, or you allow the audience to actually start clapping for you.
Wow, I mean, that's fascinating. And so, what you're saying is, as a musician grows older or more seasoned, then they are able to use the pauses more wisely, is sort of what I heard.
Yeah.
And I have another question connected to that. Speaking of different cultures you may be familiar with, do you think that different cultures would use pauses in music differently?
Well, I think it's not about the culture, it's about the form of music and the purpose of that piece of music or composition. If
I
you're
see.
if you're making the piece of music to serve as a dance piece, for example, That's
Hmm.
completely different than if you're making a piece of music to serve as a meditation piece of music, for example, or if
Right.
you are trying to take the audience and tell them a story. So every time that you're going to compose, you have a set of criterias in your mind, and those criterias basically help you choose the elements that would best serve you in order to make the best song that is possibly available to you, or possibly if it's possible for you to do. So I think it's more of the agenda and the purpose of
Hmm.
that music that calls for the silence, and how long and how much.
I see, I see. But it's also fascinating that you think that the more seasoned a musician is, as they grow older, also, and more experienced, that
Yeah.
they're able to use the silences more expertly. Which brings me to another question, which has to do with in not just in music, but in communication, we need silences
Hmm.
and pauses. But sometimes I feel like, including myself, I try to put in too many words into the void, and try to fill the void with words.
Yeah.
Why do we do that? Are we afraid of silences? I mean, why are we afraid of silences, or is that just me? I don't know.
Well, I'm not going to talk for you. I'm going to talk in general, because every person I think has a different reason. I personally myself had that reason, and it was difficult for me. It was awkward to leave silences in between
Hmm.
phrases when I spoke, and I later realized it's because I don't trust the audience to stay with me, and I
Mm.
don't want to lose them, so I continue talking. And I think if I put this moment of silence, I'm going to lose their attention, which goes back to the fact that I believed that what I'm saying is not valuable to that person. Sometimes you say
Mm.
something that is valuable, but it's a wrong audience. So if you put it rest, they're gonna lose you. But we know that putting a silence and pauses in between a speech is one of the good techniques in public speaking. Good public speakers actually do use silences very wisely to grab
Right.
attention and to let the audience to think about what was said before. So I think we can definitely do it. And in theater also, if you look at some of the techniques, they actually count. I don't know if professionals do that or not, but I know that amateur theater actors, they go 1,001, 1,002, 1,003 before they say the next phrase. So
Mm.
um, it's basically just a learned technique. So we can also implement that in our techniques of talking to other people. So I do actually recommend it, because once you actually put a rest in your between your sentences, then your other factors need to get actually more aroused. So if you're waiting, like if you're putting a pause and you're not saying anything, you need to keep the eye contact, for example, going.
Mm.
You need to have the body language continuing. Same thing in music. If you're putting a pause and everything is quiet, something has to be boiling up. Like either like if you're on a piano, like you let the piano ring, or if it's the breath of the musician is being heard, the breath is what is filling up that silence. So I believe that we need to practice using silences in our speech and in our music.
Wow, that's very beautiful. And what that brings up for me is that there is there in silence, in that expectancy is sound, and in sound you are waiting for the silence.
Silence, exactly.
I mean, I love that. It's like the yin yang, and the little dot in between. The darkness. There's light and light in the darkness,
Mm-hmm.
like that. So silence needs the sound. Sound needs the silence,
Mm-hmm.
and in a beautiful way, they're complementing each other. That's
Exactly.
one thing that comes up for me. And what you said earlier about why in the past maybe you didn't pay as much attention to pauses,
Mm-hmm.
was that maybe you didn't trust what you said was valuable,
Mm-hmm.
and that's exactly, as a professor, this is what happened to me too. I
Mm-hmm.
thought that if I did not speak continually, then I would lose my students. But
Mm-hmm.
then when I started to actually stop and wait, then some beautiful comment would come up from one of my students
Mm-hmm.
who takes that silence to bring their own music, or almost into the into the in between. That silence allows that in between to grow,
Yes.
and something that happens then belongs to all of us together,
Yeah.
as opposed to me being afraid and not trusting myself
Mm-hmm.
that I can actually keep silent, and it's okay.
Yeah. And it's more respectful, in my opinion, as well, because you're giving the other person to think and also
Mm-hmm.
express. Like if you're continuously speaking, there's no room left for anybody else to talk. It's just like very
Right.
one directional. But if there's a moment of rest there, maybe they can say something or maybe they can think a little bit deeper.
Mm-hmm.
It's more respectful, definitely.
It's more respectful. And also, I was listening to a spiritual teacher, a famous spiritual teacher, Eckhart Tolle,
Mm-hmm.
one of his podcasts.
Mm-hmm.
And boy, does he use silence constantly. He might say one thing and then he just stops. And you wonder if he's going to say anything else. Literally, like you're waiting. And he says, "Don't wait for me. I might not say anything.
Mm-hmm.
It does it matter? Because, in fact, that's allowing you to really understand and digest, sort of
Mm-hmm.
contemplate what he said while he's not saying anything."
Yeah. I can also tell you a secret in music. It can also be in speech also. Like once,
Mm.
let's say that you bring up a phrase or a sentence and you do not finish it and you pause.
Mm.
What happens is that the mind of the listener would like to finish that. So they finish it in their mind. It could be a musical phrase that they finish, or it could be
Mm-hmm.
a sentence that they finish. And then you finish the sentence after they finished it in their mind, and it's as if they have composed your music or they have told you what to say. And it's a very beautiful way for them to feel like, oh, I'm so connected to this musician, or I'm so connected to this speaker, that we are finishing each other's sentences. I believe that if musicians or speakers can actually use the silence as a way to just let the audience feel like, I trust you so much that I would allow you to finish my phrase, and then I know
Yeah.
what you're gonna say and I finish it after you, so I echo what you just thought. It's a very beautiful connection and people enjoy it so much.
Wow. I mean, yes, I can see that too. But maybe just to wrap it up,
Hmm.
I don't want to leave this on a negative note. I'm
Yeah.
not sure if but still, when we talk about silence, there's also, as in my poem, I mentioned oppressed silences.
Oh yeah.
I mean, not all silence is a peaceful silence that's coming from the heart, or to let the other person, other side,
Hmm.
speak or do music, but sometimes it's not allowed to
Yeah.
speak up. But
Yes.
maybe that's a different that's a different conversation. I'm not sure. What do you think?
Mm. I agree completely with you. That's what exactly happening in a lot of the countries, especially in Iran, with the government trying to basically silence people and not allowing them to express what they need to express
Yeah,
physically or with in their actions, what to wear and things like that. And it's a very important thing that you brought up. Maybe we can talk about that oppressed silences in a different episode. But we need to
yeah,
know that silence is not something that has to do with sound. You can silence someone from living. You can silence someone from expression. You can silence someone from having an identity. You can silence
yeah.
someone from living a childhood, for example. You can just take
Hmm.
things away and you're basically putting a mute on that part of that person's life. And it is difficult to say what that person is supposed to do, because in tough situations, oppressed situations, it's hard to be loud when they're trying to make you quiet. But I can tell you from a point of view of a musician, sometimes a silence from an oppressed person is as valuable as thousands of symphonies. You're
Oh,
like
mm-hmm.
you look at a tear rolling down someone's face, and
Yeah,
that speaks a world. You need 1,000
yeah,
books to express what that means.
yeah.
Or you see somebody not having shoes, or you
Mm-hmm,
see
mm-hmm,
somebody looking for food in a trash can, or you see
mm-hmm.
somebody being punished because of something that they wanted to do, like riding a bike or not wearing a hijab or not wanting to marry a person that they don't like, and they're getting punished for it. And just like one look of disgust on their face is talks more than 1,000 books, I believe. But you have to be able to read it also. It's not everybody can read emotions from faces, you know.
So really what you're saying is silence there's many different kinds of silences in communication. And silence itself can be a way of communication, but silence when it's muted and it's against one's will, then we're not talking about a pause, we're talking about being muted, which is a very different thing.
Yeah,
You know, it seems like this is a much deeper topic than we're just
definitely.
skimming the surface right now.
Yes.
But I really, really appreciate at least this much to get into the topic for now. And thank you very much for joining me today, Amir. I will
Yeah.
say to be continued, inshallah.
To be continued. Thank you. Thank you for having me. And I do invite our listeners to actually think about silence a little bit deeper and pay attention to how they use silences in their lives, in their speeches, with their partners, with their kids, with their loved ones, how they look at each other's eyes and not say anything, and how long they can actually continue looking and expressing feelings through just silence. It's a very
That's
powerful practice.
excellent.
Yeah,
Thank you for that. That's an excellent recommendation because I love to finish a podcast with some suggestions for our listeners too,
sure,
connected to our topic. So this
sure.
is a perfect suggestion. Practicing silence.
Practicing silence.
Thank you, and until next time, Amir, and take care, and we'll talk again later. Again, thank you
All right,
so much.
all right, Nakia. Thank you so much. Talk with you soon.
Yeah, bye bye for now.
Bye.
Dear listeners, we have come to the end of this podcast. I hope that this conversation has excited you, perhaps suggested a new way of approaching silence. Listening to the silence, becoming more aware of the pauses in between, in both conversations and music and your own breath. Please feel free to write to us with questions, comments, feedback at cubicwisdomproject, one word, at gmail.com. We would be delighted to hear from you. Looking forward to being with you at our next podcast. Take care. Goodbye for now. Be well and enjoy the beauty of pauses.